Bikers knock over Grandma's cart, then wish they hadn't. In the sleepy town of Willowbrook, a ruthless biker gang led by Troy Maddox ruled through fear and intimidation. The Black Vipers, as they called themselves, spent their days loitering around the town's markets, harassing shop owners, and ensuring that no one dared to stand up to them. The residents of Willowbrook lived in constant fear, knowing that the slightest provocation could bring the wrath of the bikers upon them. Among the townspeople was Eleanor Ellie Carter, a kind-hearted elderly woman known for her homemade jams, preserves, and baked goods. Every Saturday, Ellie would push her cart filled with an array of delectable treats to the town's open-air market, where she would sell her wares to the locals. Her warm smile and gentle demeanor made her a beloved figure in the community. Little did the Black Vipers know that Ellie was no ordinary grandmother. She was the mother of James Carter, a retired Special Forces operative who had recently returned to Willowbrook after years of service. James, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a commanding presence, was a respected figure in the community, known for his unwavering sense of justice and his commitment to protecting the innocent. As Ellie prepared for another Saturday at the market, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The air seemed thick with tension, and the usually bustling streets were eerily quiet. Unbeknownst to her, the Black Vipers had decided that today would be the day they asserted their dominance over the town once and for all. The open-air market was a colorful array of stalls, each displaying a variety of fresh produce, handcrafted goods, and local delicacies. The aroma of freshly baked bread and the chatter of the townspeople filled the air as Ellie navigated her cart through the narrow aisles. She greeted her fellow vendors with a warm smile, exchanging pleasant conversations and well wishes for a successful day of sales. As the morning progressed, the market grew busier, with locals and visitors alike perusing the stalls in search of their favorite items. Ellie's homemade jams and preserves were a hit, as usual, with customers praising her culinary skills and the love she poured into every jar. However, the peaceful atmosphere was soon shattered by the roar of motorcycle engines. The Black Vipers, led by the intimidating Troy Maddox, rolled into the market, their sleek black bikes gleaming in the sunlight. The townspeople froze, their eyes widening in fear as the bikers dismounted and began to saunter through the stalls. Troy, a tall, heavily tattooed man with a cruel sneer, zeroed in on Ellie's cart. He approached her, his heavy boots thudding against the pavement. "Well, he drawled, his voice dripping with malice. "What do we have here? A little old lady trying to make a living?" Ellie stood her ground, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the handles of her cart. "I'm just here to sell my goods, like everyone else," she replied, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. Troy let out a harsh laugh, his eyes glinting with amusement. "You hear that, boys?" he called out to his gang. "Grandma here thinks she's just like everyone else. Maybe we should show her how things work around here." The bikers began to close in on Ellie's cart, their menacing presence causing the other vendors and customers to shrink back in fear. Ellie's heart raced as she realized that she was about to become the target of the Black Vipers' cruelty. As the bikers surrounded Ellie's cart, their sneers and taunting laughter filled the air. Troy reached out and picked up one of Ellie's carefully crafted jars of strawberry jam, turning it over in his hands with a look of disdain. "You call this slop homemade?" he scoffed, his eyes narrowing. "I wouldn't feed this to my dog." Ellie's cheeks flushed with a mix of anger and embarrassment, but she held her tongue, knowing that any retort would only provoke the bikers further. She watched helplessly as Troy tossed the jar carelessly back onto her cart, the glass clattering against the metal surface. The other bikers, emboldened by their leader's actions, began to paw through Ellie's wares, picking up jars and baked goods, only to discard them haphazardly. They laughed and jeered, their voices growing louder and more menacing with each passing moment. Suddenly, one of the bikers, a burly man with a scar running down his cheek, grabbed the edge of Ellie's cart and gave it a violent shove. The cart tipped precariously, its contents spilling onto the pavement in a crash of shattering glass and scattered produce. Ellie stumbled, trying to regain her balance, but the weight of the cart pulled her down, and she fell to her knees amidst the ruins of her livelihood. The bikers erupted in laughter, their cruel amusement echoing through the market. The other vendors and customers watched in horrified silence, too afraid to intervene. Ellie, her face flushed with humiliation and pain, began to gather the broken remnants of her jars and baked goods, her hands shaking as she tried to salvage what she could. Unbeknownst to the bikers, James Carter had witnessed the entire scene from across the market. His jaw clenched in barely contained rage as he watched his mother being subjected to such cruelty. He knew that he had to act, but he also knew that rushing in with fists flying would only make matters worse. Instead, he began to formulate a plan, one that would not only protect his mother but also free Willowbrook from the tyranny of the Black Vipers once and for all. As Ellie struggled to pick up the shattered pieces of her livelihood, James made his way through the market, his steps purposeful and measured. He approached his mother, kneeling down beside her and gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Mom," he said softly, his voice filled with concern. "Are you all right?" Ellie looked up at her son, her eyes brimming with tears. "I'm fine, James," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. It's just a few broken jars. I can make more." James shook his head, his expression hardening. "This isn't right, Mom. These bikers can't keep terrorizing the town like this. Someone has to stop them." Ellie sighed, her shoulders sagging. "But what can we do, James? They're too powerful. Everyone is afraid of them." James helped his mother to her feet, his mind racing with ideas. "We can't fight them head-on," he said, his voice low. "But we can outsmart them. We need to turn their own tactics against them, expose their weaknesses, and show the town that they're not invincible." Ellie looked at her son, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Do you really think we can do that?" James nodded, a determined smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I know we can, Mom. But we can't do it alone. We need the help of the community. We need to rally everyone together and show them that they have the power to stand up for themselves." As James and Ellie began to clean up the remnants of her cart, the other vendors and customers slowly approached, offering their help and support. Word of the bikers' cruelty spread quickly through the market, and soon, the entire town was buzzing with talk of standing up to the Black Vipers. Troy and his gang, oblivious to the growing resistance, continued their reign of terror, unaware that their actions had set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately lead to their downfall. The seeds of change had been planted, and with James and Ellie at the helm, Willowbrook was about to undergo a transformation that would forever alter the course of its history. In the days following the incident at the market, James set his plan into motion. He began by reaching out to the other members of the community, quietly gathering support and building a network of allies. He spoke with shop owners, farmers, and local tradespeople, listening to their stories of fear and oppression under the rule of the Black Vipers. As he listened, James realized that the bikers' power stemmed not from their physical strength, but from the fear they instilled in others. He knew that to break their hold on the town, he would need to chip away at that fear, one person at a time. He started by encouraging small acts of defiance. He convinced shop owners to refuse service to the bikers, citing their disruptive behavior and lack of respect for the community. He worked with farmers to create a cooperative, ensuring that they could support one another and stand up to the bikers' demands for protection money. Slowly but surely, the townspeople began to find their courage. They started to stand a little taller, to look the bikers in the eye instead of cowering in fear. They began to realize that they outnumbered the Black Vipers, and that together, they had the power to reclaim their town. Meanwhile, Ellie became a symbol of resilience and hope for the community. Despite the attack on her livelihood, she refused to be cowed by the bikers' intimidation. She rebuilt her cart, restocked her wares, and returned to the market with her head held high. Her quiet strength inspired others, and soon, the market became a hub of resistance. Vendors began to display signs of solidarity, offering discounts to those who stood up to the bikers and refusing to pay the protection fees demanded by Troy and his gang. As the community began to unite, Troy and the Black Vipers grew increasingly uneasy. They could sense the shifting tides, the growing resistance to their once unquestioned authority. They knew that they needed to act fast, to crush this rebellion before it could gain any more momentum. But they had no idea just how formidable an opponent they were about to face. Troy Maddox was not a man accustomed to being challenged. He had ruled Willowbrook with an iron fist for years, and the idea that anyone would dare to defy him was almost laughable. But as he watched the townspeople begin to stand up to his gang, he felt a flicker of unease in the pit of his stomach. He decided to take action, to remind the town who was in charge. He gathered his most loyal followers and set out to make an example of those who had dared to resist him. Their first target was the cooperative formed by the farmers. Troy and his men rode out to the fields, their bikes kicking up clouds of dust as they tore through the countryside. They descended upon the farmers like a pack of wolves, smashing equipment and threatening violence if their demands for payment were not met. But to Troy's surprise, the farmers did not back down. They stood their ground, armed with the knowledge that they were not alone. They had the support of the entire community behind them, and they were no longer afraid. As news of the farmers' bravery spread through the town, others began to follow suit. Shop owners refused to serve the bikers, and those who had once paid protection money now withheld their payments. The Black Vipers found themselves increasingly isolated, their once unquestioned authority slipping away with each passing day. Ellie and James watched the transformation of their town with a mixture of pride and trepidation. They knew that the bikers would not go down without a fight, and that there would be challenges and setbacks along the way. But they also knew that they had started something bigger than themselves, something that had the power to change Willowbrook forever. As the resistance grew, James continued to work behind the scenes, gathering information on the bikers and their activities. He knew that to truly defeat them, he would need to expose their weaknesses and bring their crimes to light. He just needed the right moment, the right piece of evidence, to set his final plan into motion. That moment came sooner than James expected. Late one night, as he was walking home from a meeting with a group of concerned citizens, he stumbled upon a scene that would change everything. In a darkened alley behind the town's only bar, James saw Troy and several of his men engaged in a heated argument with a group of strangers. As he watched from the shadows, he realized that the strangers were not mere passers-by, but rather members of a rival biker gang from a neighboring town. The argument quickly escalated, and James watched in horror as Troy pulled a gun from his waistband and fired a single shot into the chest of one of the rival bikers. The man crumpled to the ground, blood pooling beneath him as his companions fled into the night. James knew that he had just witnessed a murder, and that he had the evidence he needed to bring Troy and his gang to justice. But he also knew that he couldn't go to the authorities, not yet. He needed to be smart, to use this information to his advantage. The next day, James sent word to Troy that he had something the biker needed to see. Troy, suspicious but intrigued, agreed to meet James on the outskirts of town. When Troy arrived, James was waiting for him, a laptop open on the hood of his car. On the screen was a video, grainy but unmistakable, of the murder in the alley. Troy's face paled as he watched the footage, his eyes darting nervously from the screen to James. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice tight with fear. James smiled coldly. "I want you and your gang out of Willowbrook," he said. "I want you to leave and never come back. And if you don't, I'll make sure that everyone in this town, and every law enforcement agency in the state, sees this video." Troy's jaw clenched, his hands balling into fists at his sides. But he knew that he was beaten. He had no choice but to agree to James's terms, to pack up his gang and leave Willowbrook forever. News of the Black Vipers' departure spread through Willowbrook like wildfire. At first, many were skeptical, wondering if it was just another trick or if the bikers would return with reinforcements. But as the days turned into weeks, and the streets remained quiet and peaceful, the townspeople began to breathe a collective sigh of relief. Ellie and James found themselves at the center of the community's gratitude. Everywhere they went, people stopped to thank them, to shake their hands and offer their support. They were hailed as heroes, as the saviors of Willowbrook. But James knew that the real heroes were the people of the town themselves. They had found the courage to stand up to their oppressors, to unite in the face of adversity and fight for their freedom. He was just a catalyst, a spark that had ignited the flame of resistance. As the town began to heal and rebuild, James and Ellie turned their attention to the future. They knew that Willowbrook had a long road ahead, that there would be challenges and obstacles to overcome. But they also knew that they had the strength and resilience to face whatever lay ahead. They started by organizing a community meeting, inviting everyone in town to come together and discuss their vision for the future. Ideas flowed freely, from plans for a new community center to proposals for a farmer's market and a small business incubator. As the meeting drew to a close, Ellie stood up to address the crowd. "We've been through so much together," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "But we've also shown that we are stronger than we ever knew. We have the power to shape our own destiny, to create the kind of town we want to live in." The room erupted in applause, and James felt a swell of pride in his chest. He knew that his mother was right, that Willowbrook had the power to transform itself. And he knew that he would be there every step of the way, fighting alongside his neighbors to build a brighter, more just future for them all. As the weeks turned into months, Willowbrook began to thrive in ways it never had before. The community center became a hub of activity, hosting classes, workshops, and events that brought people together and fostered a sense of belonging. The farmers' market became a weekly celebration of local food and culture, drawing visitors from neighboring towns and boosting the local economy. But perhaps the most significant change was the one that took place within the hearts and minds of the townspeople themselves. They had tasted freedom, had seen what they were capable of when they stood together, and they were determined never to let that feeling slip away again. They formed neighborhood watch groups and community patrols, working together to keep the streets safe and secure. They volunteered their time and resources to help those in need, from the elderly to the newly arrived immigrants seeking a better life. And at the center of it all were Ellie and James, the mother and son who had become the heart and soul of the town. They were the ones people turned to for advice and guidance, the ones who always seemed to know just what to say or do to bring people together. But even as Willowbrook basked in its newfound sense of unity and purpose, there were still those who harbored doubts and fears. Some of the older residents, who had lived through the darkest days of the Black Viper's reign, worried that the peace and prosperity were too good to be true. They feared that the bikers would return, or that some new threat would emerge to take their place. James understood their concerns, but he also knew that Willowbrook was a different town now. They had learned the power of unity, of standing together in the face of adversity. They had seen what they could accomplish when they put their differences aside and worked towards a common goal. He spent long hours walking the streets, talking to people, listening to their hopes and fears. He organized town hall meetings and community forums, creating spaces where people could come together and share their ideas and concerns. And slowly but surely, he began to see a change. The doubters and the skeptics began to come around, to see the value in what they had built together. They began to believe in themselves and in each other, to see that they had the strength and the resilience to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the one-year anniversary of the Black Viper's departure approached, Ellie and James knew that they wanted to mark the occasion with something special. They began to plan a celebration, a day of music and food and laughter that would bring the entire town together. They reached out to local musicians and artists, to farmers and craftsmen, to anyone who wanted to be a part of the festivities. And on the day of the celebration, as the sun rose over Willowbrook, the streets were already buzzing with excitement. People came from far and wide to be a part of the day, to share in the joy and the pride of a town that had been reborn. And as the music played and the laughter rang out, James and Ellie looked out over the sea of smiling faces and knew that they had been a part of something truly special, something that would endure long after they were gone. As the celebration wound down and the last of the visitors began to make their way home, James found himself reflecting on all that had happened in the past year. He thought about the challenges they had faced, the obstacles they had overcome, and the bonds they had forged in the process. He thought about Troy and the Black Vipers, about the fear and the violence they had inflicted on the town for so long. And he thought about the moment when he had finally confronted Troy, had shown him the video that would be his undoing. It had been a moment of triumph, of justice served at long last. But it had also been a moment of sadness, of regret for all the lives that had been lost and the pain that had been endured along the way. James knew that there was still work to be done, that Willowbrook would always face challenges and difficulties. But he also knew that they had the strength and the courage to face those challenges head-on, to build a better future for themselves and for generations to come. As he made his way home that night, he stopped by the community center, now dark and quiet in the late night hours. He sat down on the steps and looked up at the stars, marveling at the beauty and the vastness of the universe. And then he heard a voice behind him, soft and familiar. "Mind if I join you?" Ellie asked, settling down beside him on the steps. For a long moment they sat together in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. And then Ellie spoke again, her voice filled with pride and love. "I always knew you were special, James," she said. "From the moment you were born, I knew that you were destined for great things. And watching you this past year, seeing the way you've brought this town together and given people hope, it's been the greatest joy of my life." James felt tears prick at his eyes, overwhelmed by his mother's words. And as they sat there together under the stars, he knew that no matter what the future held, they would always have each other, and the love and the strength of the community they had built together. In the days and weeks that followed, Willowbrook continued to thrive. The community center became a second home for many, a place where people could come to learn, to create, and to connect with one another. The farmers' market became a weekly tradition, a celebration of the town's bounty and the hard work of its people. But even as the town basked in its newfound sense of unity and purpose, James knew that there was still more work to be done. He began to look beyond the borders of Willowbrook, to the neighboring towns and cities that were still struggling under the weight of corruption and violence. He reached out to community leaders and activists, sharing the story of Willowbrook and the lessons they had learned along the way. He offered support and guidance, helping them to build their own networks of resistance and resilience. And slowly but surely, he began to see a ripple effect, a wave of change that was spreading out from Willowbrook and touching the lives of people far beyond its borders. It was a movement born of hope and courage, of the belief that ordinary people could come together and make a difference in the world. As the months turned into years, James watched with pride as Willowbrook continued to grow and thrive. He saw new businesses open their doors, new families put down roots, new dreams take flight. And he knew that none of it would have been possible without the love and the strength of the community they had built together. One day, as he was walking through the town square, he came across a group of children playing together in the sunshine. They were laughing and shouting, their faces bright with joy and innocence. And as he watched them play, James felt a sense of hope and possibility wash over him. He knew that these children were the future of Willowbrook, the ones who would carry on the legacy of all that they had accomplished together. And he knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, no matter what darkness or despair they might face, they would always have each other, and the love and the light that burned within them all. Years passed, and Willowbrook continued to flourish. The town became a model of what was possible when people came together in the spirit of community and cooperation. Other towns and cities began to take notice, to study the methods and the strategies that had transformed Willowbrook from a place of fear and violence into a thriving, vibrant community. James and Ellie became more than just local heroes, they became symbols of hope and resilience, living proof of the power of ordinary people to change the world. They were invited to speak at conferences and workshops, to share their story and their wisdom with others who were struggling to build a better future for themselves and their communities. And as they traveled the country and the world, they never forgot the lessons they had learned in Willowbrook. They never forgot the courage and the strength of the people who had stood together in the face of darkness and despair, who had refused to be broken by fear or hatred. They saw that same courage and strength in the faces of the people they met along the way, in the activists and the organizers, the teachers and the healers, the dreamers and the visionaries who were working to build a better world. And they knew that no matter how dark the night might seem, no matter how long the road ahead might be, there was always hope, always the possibility of a new dawn. One evening, as the sun began to set over Willowbrook, James and Ellie found themselves walking hand in hand through the town square. They paused for a moment, looking out over the bustling streets and the laughter-filled parks, the gardens and the playgrounds that had become the heart and soul of their community. And as they stood there together, they knew that they had been a part of something truly special, something that would endure long after they were gone. They had helped to build a town that was more than just a place to live, it was a testament to the power of love and compassion, of courage and resilience in the face of adversity. As the years continued to pass, Willowbrook became more than just a town, It became a symbol, a beacon of hope in a world that often seemed full of darkness and despair. People came from far and wide to see the community that had been transformed by the power of love and compassion, to learn from the wisdom and the experience of its people. And at the center of it all, always, were James and Ellie. They became the elders of Willowbrook, the ones who held the stories and the memories of all that had come before. They were the ones who reminded the town of its history, of the struggles and the triumphs that had shaped it into the place it was today. They watched as a new generation grew up in Willowbrook, as children who had never known the fear and the violence of the past became leaders and visionaries in their own right. They watched as the town continued to grow and change, as new challenges arose and new opportunities emerged. But through it all, one thing remained constant: the love and the compassion that had always been the heart of Willowbrook. It was a love that knew no bounds, that reached out to embrace everyone who came seeking shelter and solace within its borders. And as James and Ellie grew older, as they began to feel the weight of their years upon them, they knew that they had one last gift to give to the town they loved so dearly. They began to write down their stories, to record the history of Willowbrook in all its complexity and all its beauty. They filled page after page with memories and reflections, with the wisdom they had gained over a lifetime of struggle and triumph. And when they were finished, they knew that they had created something that would endure long after they were gone, a testament to the power of community, to the strength and the resilience of the human spirit. As they sat together in the fading light of evening, surrounded by the love and the laughter of their town, James and Ellie knew that they had found what they had always been searching for: a place to call home, a family to call their own, and a love that would never die.